Welcome to Capitalizing Your Life, the podcast that shows you how to take control of your money, build lasting wealth, and create financial freedom using the infinite banking concept. If you're ready to make your cash flow work for you instead of someone else, you're in the right place. Here's your host, Glenn Yaney.
Welcome to Capitalizing Your Life podcast. It's Glenn Yaney here, a solo podcast, going on a little rant. I love talking about personal finance and how I structure my cash flow. And I have these internal conversations with myself while I'm driving. And I always think to myself, man, I should just record these to be able to talk to, the followers of my podcast. And I actually get the most feedback from my solo podcast. So if you hear anything you like, make sure you comment, like, and obviously subscribe. But if you know me personally, and if you want to know me personally, you can always schedule yourself to jump on a Calendly invites where we can talk about your cash flow and how we could create more ownership in your life. And if you see me out in public, definitely mention what you liked about the podcast. So I'm going to go into a little rant about how we're taking back ownership of our life. And I had a conversation with somebody that really you can evaluate, you can see holes in people's financial life. And it's like when I talked to Matt Love, we were talking about like, how do we show the people the problem? Like, how do we point it out without offending people? So really that was coming down to like when we are going to work and we creating, we have our lifestyle and we have all these expenses that happen in our life. And there's this, in my opinion, there's this human life value that we have to give up to be able to live life. So how do we take back ownership of that? How do we figure out how to offset these expenses to be able to not have to work for the time that we want to have with our friends and family and then really be able to take back our financial system? And that's really, for me, is practicing the infinite banking concept with properly structured whole life policy. So let's talk about like what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. And I'll tell you how I got to where I'm, a lot of you have already heard my story, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. But I was contributing a lot of my money, like 50 something thousand between me and my wife towards government sponsored plans. And what I was doing is separating myself from the capital. It's like the first, I believe I was doing everything that like the Market Watch articles say is preparing for my future, retirement, blah, 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 and for me, retirement doesn't work. I have skills that I'm building, and it would be selfish of me to not be able to share these skills with somebody and say, I'm no longer going to share my skills with somebody. I'm going to sit on, do nothing. I'm going to do nothing and really just embrace like doing nothing, which is a big state of depression. So for me, retirement's not in my vocabulary, as I try to keep it out. I don't like to use it as a word, but what we're aiming for is financial independence, also financial ownership. You can have financial independence, but still be owned by your assets. So I've gone to levels of where, how do I create a system that becomes less operator dependent and more of people that know what to do and take advantage of opportunities in my business. So let's go into, I was funneling $50,000 into my, these government sponsored plans. I decided I had to slowly ease into that. I lowered it to 5% because that's where the match was. And then I later thought to myself, I'm making $150,000 a year. That means $7,000 a year going to this match. And that's $7,000 less towards my personal goals. And I'm giving at the beginning, 50,000 and 7,000. The way I look at it is I'm giving somebody capital to fulfill their dreams, and I'm taking away from my dreams to live them when I'm 65. So no longer is that something that I do. I focus on creating an operating system that is really focused on building out ownership of my life and my time to be able to go to my little girl's gymnastics class at 3:00 this afternoon, to be able to take off on weekends, to be able to be excited about Mondays. That's what I'm creating. And so what I started doing is I started focusing on putting all my capital into cash flowing assets. And that cash flow creates margin for liquidity on my monthly expenses, but also it spreads out my concentration risk of my W-2 income, where something happens to my, some board member in some room far away that I don't get to talk to, that doesn't know me personally, decides to scratch my name off the list. That I was always afraid of, because I was in such a niche industry that it felt like I would never be able to get back to that earned income. So I had to figure out a way to create passive income to be able to leave. or be able to have the option to leave. And so what had happened is I got to $5,000 a month of passive income, and I was still making around $150,000 a year. And that took me about 2 to 3 years to get to. And if you think about that, 3 years to grow $60,000 a year income and being intentional and really being the owner of my system. This is when I'm the owner. I'm the owner and I grow $60,000 a year income, and my $150,000 a year is still the same. It stayed the same I was there for 9 years, and it was pretty much $150,000 a year the whole time, which isn't bad income. But when I started really focusing on building out my own system, that system grew 60,000 within 3 years. So if I were to continue to do that for the rest of my life, where do you think that income's going to go? It's going to go a lot faster, and not like depending on what the tolerable increase of payroll that the board members allowed to do. So like they say, okay, we're going to get 3 to 5 year increases in pay. It's like, no, that's not okay. I'm going to go 20 to 50% increase in my pay is what I'm aiming for. Hey guys, if you'd like to learn more about the infinite banking concept and how to flow your capital through your own financing system, my team and I are here to help. With over 35 years of experience, we can guide you in building a properly structured whole life policy tailored to you and your family. See the scheduling link below. Now, back to the show. So what ended up happening is I ended up leaving my W-2 job to go, because I was totally fried, burnt out, and I left that job. And what I gave up on is $150,000 of investable capital. And this is still thinking as an employee, but at the same time, all I cared about is that I just wanted to get out. And so I was able to do that. It worked out. I built, I believe, a successful real estate business. There's different levels of success, but it was successful enough to be able to support my lifestyle. And also because of passive income, I was able to survive on a very low income. And really, my new income was equity. So I was growing my business, and every deal we'd buy, I would be able to, I'd get like an acquisition fee or a finance fee or whatever it was. And I would just never actually need that, except for I'd roll it into a deal. And my net worth really went up after that. It really focused on the balance sheet. And as I became more balance sheet focused instead of cash flow focused, is when I started to realize how important this infinite banking concept was. I had some liquidity moments where I had some failed refinances, and the banks were asking very difficult questions for me. They would be like, okay, what is your liquidity? Like, where is your source of liquidity? And it's like, well, I have all this real estate. And to the bank, that means over leverage. You don't have any liquidity to pay if anything happens. And so things started happening. And it coincidentally happened right before 2 hurricanes hit me. So the 2 failed refinances, and because I wasn't great on my balance sheet, but also there's some operational issues with the property where we decided, that owning mobile homes is a losing game, and we had to switch to really selling off the mobile homes and the insurances and all the stuff that came into it, the expenses of owning the mobile home. So we ended up having to pivot from there as well. But that also, there was multiple problems that were happening, but the one personally that I could have fixed immediately is to shore up my balance sheet. So I started seeing value in having liquidity. And where do I store my liquidity? When I have $100,000 in my bank account, I have a problem. To me, it's a problem. And I have to go invest it. I have to either invest it or I'm going to spend it on myself. Like, go out to that nice vacation, go clothes shopping more, go out to the fancy dinners more often, so this is what happens. Nelson Nash calls it Parkinson's law, lifestyle inflation. So I have to create a reservoir of capital. And guess what? I learned about infinite banking about the same time, and it became a place where I could store my capital and be able to take full access to. Really, within the first year is around 60 to 70%. The second year, around 90 to 95%. But I'm also protecting my family and creating a family banking system. So that was the part I loved. It makes sense. And really taking back ownership. And the longer I'm funding these premiums, the more ownership I take back. It's like I become more, the sleep at night becomes better because, when people file bankruptcy, it isn't because they have too much debt. It's because they don't have enough liquidity. And with me, I have a lot of debt in my name, and I have lots of assets coming, paying, and the income is fine. But if something bad happens, a CapEx project becomes way more than I expected, I'm going to need liquidity. And it's like, it's either I'm going to borrow it from a bank, borrow it from an investor, or be able to have access to capital. And I don't think borrowing it from a bank or borrowing it from an investor is a terrible thing. But if you don't have the liquidity to pay the investors or the bank, then you have a problem. And that's when the increased amount of stress happens. And I've seen it through other business owners outside of real estate. But I think with real estate, it becomes a place where it just becomes so easy to just constantly just dish out the capital, just constantly find more deals. And what we're trying to do is create a foundational structure to be able to build something that lasts. So if you think about 2008, how many people had a lot of real estate and no longer have real estate? What happened to the people? What happened to them is they didn't have the liquidity. They didn't have, good financing structures on their real estate. They had loans being called because they're short-term loans. They had lines of credits being shut down. These are things that eventually are going to happen again. Do you want to be on the wrong side of that? And for me, I think when you hear about people committing suicide, it's not really homeless people. It's usually the person that went from 10 million that turned into a millionaire. They went from 10 million to a million. Don't want to be that person. So how do I stop that from happening? I have to build out a safe, sound, functional, available capital for me, really, when the bad times do come. And for me, I was fortunate enough to discover infinite banking right before 2 hurricanes came through. And I still had to borrow from banks and borrow from investors, but I had this liquid asset in the background while I was able to do that. And really, it's like, it was very stressful. It didn't take away the stress, but there was still some peace of mind that I still had a little bit of capital saved in the background, consistently growing. And some of it I borrowed from, majority of it, but I still had some liquidity that would be able to get my personal expenses, at least 2 to 3 months worth of expenses, which isn't a great place. I think having over a year of expenses saved is a better position. But, at the time, it was like I was just starting off. I was just getting off the ground, realized the value of liquidity. So now we have this asset that's growing uninterrupted. And people say, well, why would I do that if I have to borrow against it? And let's talk about what the wealthy do. They borrow against their assets. And what we're doing is we're creating a reservoir that grows uninterrupted. And by year 10, you're putting $1 in and you're getting $1.30 out of value, and availability to borrow against is really what you're doing. And it's building a liquidity. It's, an unstructured loan that doesn't require a payback, which we definitely recommend being an honest banker and being able to flow your capital back into your policy through paying premiums and also paying back loans. But there's no repayment structure. So it's like, okay, times aren't great. 6 months later, okay, times are good. We're starting to make some money now. We're back in business. Time to replenish the liquidity. It's not time to go give my money to Wall Street, because Wall Street didn't care whenever these 2 hurricanes hit my house. They did not care. They were looking, there's probably some other investors looking at my properties, figuring out how they could buy my properties for cheaper, So now we're at the point where we're building out this. Let's talk about what the wealthy do. The wealthy, Elon Musk, borrowed against Tesla to buy Twitter. They're like, where does Elon get 40? I think it was 40 trillion or something like that, 70 trillion. I don't know what the number was, but it was not trillion, billion, I'm sorry. Where did Elon Musk get the $40 billion to go take Twitter private? Who would, the maniac. So anyways, if you look at the whole playbook of Elon Musk, he's constantly trying to take back ownership of his system. He was trying to go to Mars. Everything he's doing is a plan to get to Mars. So how do you do that? You build an electric car that focuses on building batteries that last a long time. Then you borrow against that. You have your platform where nobody can silence you because you own the platform, Twitter. And then you go and you start building robots. You have a space company. All these things are happening. And it's because Elon has taken ownership towards his goal, which is going to Mars, which is a very extravagant goal. So I imagine most of our goals aren't as big, but at the same time, let's just use his playbook and let's figure out how we're going to take back ownership. So what we're doing is we have an asset, liquid asset that's growing, and we're borrowing against this liquid asset to go buy cash flowing assets or building cash flowing skills. Or, in that case, it's like, for me, my goal is to make $1 million a year. How do I get there? I have to learn. I have an ignorance tax, and it's, it could be anywhere between 700 to $800,000 of ignorance tax. So how do I shorten that tax? I got to start paying coaches, getting masterminds, hanging around people that are making $1 million a year. And that's where my capital is flowing while I'm buying real estate, which is my business. I buy real estate and this cash flow is flowing back to me and back into my system. And the way I stay disciplined is that I flow it into a properly structured whole life policy that anytime I borrow against that policy, it's intentional. I don't borrow money to, I could do it, but am I borrowing money to go on a lavish vacation? Not today, but if I want to, I can. Okay. So now we're building out this flywheel of a system where my goal is to have all of our earned income. This is income that I have to work for, is going to flow into the policy. And then all my passive income I can live on. The passive income is generally because of deductions, and it becomes to where you can actually have a better tax favored income compared to an earned income, where when they say taxing the rich, we're talking about, the earned income people, W-2s. It's like when you become a business owner, you can be able to start taking deductions, and then you become like the Warren Buffett, where he says that his secretary pays a higher percentage of taxes than he does. He's paying about 10% on his income because he's able to deduct most of it. And it's, as an earned income, you have doctors, you have, maybe attorneys. I could see attorneys, professional athletes, sales. It's like these are the people that getting hammered over the head with taxes. But while the business owners, you hear about like the Googles and the Amazons not paying any taxes, they're paying taxes, but they're paying them in a certain way through hiring employees, building businesses, building buildings, creating depreciation, paper losses to go against their taxes. And that's what we're all trying to do. We have to not criticize the wealthy, but learn from what they're doing. You have the Mark Zuckerbergs buying a $170 million house on an island to be closer to the other wealthy people. Like they're trying to be around the wealthy people. This is what they're doing. So how do we create that? We're being intentional with our money, with this borrowed, as we learn not to live on our earned income, but live on our passive income, we become better allocators of our capital. We start to look at, if I borrow $100,000 against my cash value life insurance, is this going to be a good investment? What's the yield on it? Is it going to be able to return this capital? Is it going to, instead of putting it into my bank account where I become, less intentional, it's like it flows through my fingers. It just turns into where things start showing up, like where maybe a new car like becomes very important to me, like which I have done in the past, where I'm like, man, I deserve this. I'm doing well. I'm making good income. I can pay this. I have $100,000 in my bank. Why not take $50,000 out and buy this vehicle? It's like, these are the things that I don't think that's how lifestyle inflation happens. And it's easy to do. And we've all done it. I know I was living on $5,000 a month at one time, and now I'm living on $10,000 a month. Things like this happen. But the more intentional we are with our investment capital compared to just having it in our bank account, waiting for an opportunity, we can have it in a place that's growing, uninterrupted, and waiting for an opportunity to buy, ownership back in our life is really what we're doing. And on that note, thank you so much for listening. It's a little bit longer podcast, but I think this is I'm very passionate about it. And make sure you guys like and subscribe. And if you want, schedule a time with me that we can look at your cash flow and I can show you what I would do personally with my own cash flow. And if I was we're just building out a better operating system. And on that note, have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Capitalizing Your Life podcast. Please rate, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share with someone who you think would enjoy listening.